Hi everyone, I'm Zach Reinhardt, here to review the new Ishigami Kazuya album, All Is Going Well. Now, before I get into the review, in the spirit of total transparency, I feel it might be pertinent to mention that this is released under Harsh Noise Movement Records, a record label that I've had some affiliation with. I released a track under a compilation that they did not too long ago, and I'm currently working on an EP that I plan on releasing under their record label. So there is some level of affiliation, and I don't feel that this affects my ability to give a unbiased and fair review. I'm not putting on the kid gloves for this album, but I just feel it might be worth noting. Now, Ishigami Kazuya is a noise and experimental ambient electronic music producer from Osaka. My only prior knowledge of his work is appearing on a compilation with him and hearing the song he did for that compilation. So I was at least somewhat familiar with his sound going into this album. And when this came out, the guys over at Harsh Noise Movement Records let me know because they know I review Japanese stuff and this is a Japanese album. And I said I'd check it out, and I was listening to it a few times, and I thought it had some rather kind of interesting musical qualities that I thought would be fun to talk about in a review. So I decided to review it, and here we are. This album is like 40 something minutes, and it has 8 tracks, though the intro and the outro are just that. They're just kind of short intros and outros, and the real meat of the album is the 6 middle tracks. A good track as an example of his style, I think, is the song Flying Float Flag Flute, which starts off with this kind of thick, like wall of noise that's kind of pulsing. And it only goes on for like a few seconds at the beginning, and then the floor kind of drops out from under you, and you're left with this kind of near silent ambience. Some of these tracks get so quiet and so soft that you could almost define them as lowercase if you're familiar with that kind of obscure genre. And yeah, it sits in this kind of very quiet ambience with this kind of very soft, just padding of white noise that's in the background. It's almost like just kind of background radiation that kind of just permeates the song. And it really kind of permeates all of these songs. There's always kind of this very soft kind of padding of white noise just in the background of what's going on. And you get these kind of resonant, ringing synthesizers. They maybe sound like feedback, could be feedback, but they sound somewhat similar to when you like run your finger along the rim of like a crystal glass and it kind of rings. That's kind of what they sound like. And the track very slowly builds over the next few minutes as this kind of buzzing starts to come in, and you start to get more noise infused with this very soft ambient track. And towards the end, it kind of wraps all the way back around to the beginning, and you get a very similar kind of wall of pulsating noise at the end that then once again drops out from underneath you, and you're left with this kind of very quiet, soft, kind of resonating ambience that leads you out to the end of the track. And a lot of these earlier tracks on the album follow a very similar pattern. They start out very quiet, they start out very soft. The songs almost seem like fragile, like delicate, like if I breathe too hard, I might break them. And they slowly build in a very linear fashion up to a kind of climax, and even the climax is not that intense. Like, you don't really know you're at the climax of the song until it starts to go back down and kind of mellow back out. These songs appear to be mostly loop based, as you can hear these kind of soft resonating melodies kind of repeat in phrases. And what's really kind of interesting about these tracks is how subtle the use of melody is. It's clear that he is drawing upon people like maybe the Incapacitants, especially some of their more like kind of chilled out like feedback stuff. But he's also drawing on more traditional electronic music, like ambient stuff, maybe some industrial. And the result is these very kind of spacey, ambient, soft, quiet noise tracks that make use of traditional music like melody and harmony and rhythm, but in a very kind of understated and subtle way. All the melodies are very just in the background. They're kind of buried in this kind of padding of noise. And the songs all have this kind of pulsating rhythm that's very slow and steady. It almost feels like the songs are kind of breathing in the way they kind of just rise and fall in this rhythmic pattern. My favorite track off this album is the song Clinic Clock Close Client. And it starts off with these like kind of ominous, like cultish chanting vocal samples that sound like they might be reversed. It's hard to tell. They're really unintelligible. And it kind of builds these like kind of weird, high-pitched, kind of twittering synthesizers over top of these. And these synthesizers kind of build over top of each other. And at their peak, it almost feels like I'm out in the woods and there are just a ton of birds all trying to sing over top of each other. For how synthetic it is, it sounds very kind of naturey. It really does kind of sound like bird song and the sounds of nature for a little bit. And the chanting starts to fade out as these weird twittering synthesizers start to reach their peak. And then they come back, but they're higher pitched this time. I'm not sure if he just pitched up the vocal samples or if it's maybe a different sample and this time maybe it's female. It's hard to tell with how kind of buried in the sound it is. And it starts to take this ominous tone again as this strange kind of undulating bassy synthesizer comes in. And it starts to get just really kind of weird and ominous and kind of freakish. And then it hits this peak where this big hit of noise just slams the song. And the song kind of turns into this kind of jittering, like strange, just mass of noises all just fighting for control over the song. They kind of shift over top of each other and like everything will cut out and one noise will play and that'll cut out and another noise will play. And it's like these noises and synthesizer shots, and it reaches this really kind of peak of intensity that is probably the most loud and intense moment on the whole album. And it just kind of glides to the end of the song like that, is this very kind of strange shifting mass. And what's really entertaining about this song is the journey as a whole. Like a lot of songs you get like one highlight part that you really like, but with this song and really a lot of these songs, there isn't one moment that's a highlight. There isn't one phrase that's really sticking out. It's the journey that is the entertaining part. The way it moves from one part to another, the way the textures all kind of shift over top of each other, the way the song builds and falls in intensity. These aspects of the song are really played with a lot on this album. There's a lot of focus on just moving the dynamics of the track and shifting and playing with texture. This isn't an album that has catchy melodies or anything like that. This is an album about texture and about mood. And while none of this is incredibly new, this isn't groundbreaking. No, it's not like nobody's ever done this stuff before, but it is done very well. It's just quite solid in general. My least favorite track on this album is the song Power Port Portrait Poetry, which is probably the most normal track on the album in the sense that it has the most well defined kind of sense of rhythm and set of melodies that it goes through over the course of the track. And this track has this kind of cut up female vocal sample of this woman speaking in Japanese. And it gets very kind of odd and just really kind of esoteric at times, but there's not really much dynamics to the song. It doesn't really progress a whole lot, which is my kind of main problem with the song. The only difference between the first few minutes and the last few minutes is there's just more of what was going on in the first few minutes in the last few minutes. It's just the same kind of thing to a higher degree. And it builds very linearly. It doesn't really have a lot of shifting in like parts to it. And while there are some tracks on here that have a very linear build that work very well, I think the main problem with this track is its 9-minute runtime. The other tracks that have this very kind of linear build to them are more like 4 or 5 minutes. And I feel like this one, like by the time I'm hitting the 6-minute mark, I'm just getting a little tired of it. It's still got some very interesting sound play. There's still definitely some very interesting stuff going on. It's not a bad song. I just feel it's not quite as good as the rest of the tracks on here. Overall, I do like this album. I think it's good. There's definitely some very interesting stuff here that I have enjoyed listening to, and it's fun to just kind of put your headphones on and just really kind of listen to what's going on in songs like these. These are very kind of interesting, just alone time music. But I wasn't really blown away by this album either. There's a lot of kind of motifs that I've heard before in ambient and noise music, and I don't really feel that this is going to change your mind if you weren't already interested in this kind of music. But if you are into really ambient, lowercase, noise stuff, then this is a worthy listen. It's worth checking out. I'm feeling a 7 out of 10. I'm not really blown away, but the whole thing is pretty solid from front to back. So yeah, that's me. Ishigami Kazuya, all is going well. Check it out if you're into noise and ambient and kind of experimental electronic stuff. It's worth a listen. Peace.